We love hard, we work hard, we play hard. That's what life is about. Loving who you're with and what you're doing. I couldn't ask for a better partner or a better husband.
Hello everybody, all the lovers out there, and welcome to another episode of Ask Juan and G here on Love Works. As always, I'm Juan.
And I'm G.
And today we're doing things a little different. We're not answering a question, but we have Sidney here. We're going to talk about a topic that's not really discussed in the black gay community, or the gay community, I would say.
Oh, I would say even the black community overall,
yeah,
too. So.
And that's domestic violence. It's a serious issue. I know I grew up in a home where domestic violence was an everyday occurrence. A lot of my friends that I know have experienced it growing up, and it's just something you sweep under the rug. You don't talk about what goes on in my house. And today we want to break the silence. We want to take that first step to shining a light on an issue within our community that needs to end.
And we did get a couple of questions in regards to domestic abuse. We had one instance where a guy was in a relationship, a very young guy, and he had started experiencing some signs of domestic abuse within his relationship, where his partner was shoving him, pushing him, and so forth. So this video is for him as well, and for anybody else that's in a domestic abuse relationship, or has been in one, or any of that. This is what we're talking about today, so hopefully this will help a lot of you guys out.
So Sidney, thank you so much for joining us. Say hello to the lovers out there.
How you guys doing?
All right. If we could just ask you to speak up just a little bit so that the mic can catch us.
Until we get some mics to be able to hang over our heads. We're going to have to talk loud.
So let's just dive right in. So you experienced a relationship where there was domestic abuse. How long was that relationship?
About 4 years.
About 4 years. Give us a little background, a little history on the relationship.
Well, it was 4 years. The first year, it wasn't there, or what I didn't see it was there.
Like no domestic abuse.
Right. It was more where, because during that time I had kind of went through some things with my family, and so it was a trying period for me for the first year. So, but there was no signs there for as physical abuse, verbal abuse as well, and a little bit, I guess, because during that time I was kind of going through some things where I had got laid off from my job. I was working a part-time job, and my partner was actually making more money than I was in a relationship.
Was he older than you as well?
No, he was actually younger than me.
Okay, interesting. Go ahead.
So, but anyway, he was younger than I was, and during that time he was, he made more money than I did, and it was more where I kind of leaned on him for some moral support, because during that time I had lost my grandmother. 3 months later I had lost my aunt, and then 6 months down the road, usually when a couple has been together for a long period of time, like they said back in the olden days, usually the partner normally leaves shortly after, and that's what happened with my grandfather. So I had like 3 deaths in 1 year.
So was he at the time? Was he like the only thing that was going good for you at the time?
At the time.
Like a sense of peace and kind of like a savior for you at the time.
Yeah, because even when I met him, I wasn't looking for a relationship, and he wasn't even the type of guy that I was accustomed to even dating.
Right.
And eventually, I guess the love followed, and I guess once I fell in love with him, it was just later down the line that things started to change.
And so you say later down the line, about approximately how long before you?
It was.
And what was the change that you first noticed?
The first change was, I guess, when I had finally found work, and I started working for like this medical billing company or whatever, and so I started to bring more income in the house.
Okay.
And during that time, things started to change. He was picking and choosing what we should do for us, like buying things and adding things in the apartment where we moved to. And I knew we had other bills because I had just came from being laid off, so I wanted to kind of catch up on some things.
Right.
And, I wasn't struggling, but I didn't have the money to do certain things that I was accustomed to.
Right.
So during that time, I was like, no. I said, it kind of taught me to be a little bit more frugal during that time. And it was more of, well, let's get this big TV, or I want to get something done on my car, or get a new car. And I'm like, no, not right now. And it was brought up, and I started seeing like the way that he's talked to me had changed. So that was,
More,
I guess,
verbally abusive?
Yes.
Okay, can you give us an example?
Just being called stupid.
Oh, okay.
Just anything for as my thoughts being presented was shot down, basically.
Okay.
So it started there. And just looking back, I think that's kind of where it started to go downhill.
Gotcha.
And then from there it progressed to where we were having arguments. Because the first year we didn't really have any arguments. Everything was so easygoing and just flowing, and it just after that it just changed.
Well, just to rewind, because I think this is important. When he started to change, do you feel like it was because he was losing more control over you? Was it a control? Because now that you're bringing in money and you can say what we spent our money on before, it was his money, and he could say what you spent money on.
Exactly.
You feel like he was starting to lose control of you?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was more like I couldn't go to my parents' house. It was to the point where, during that time I was actually, not telling my age, but I was actually planning my 10-year reunion.
Okay.
College or high school? Okay.
So anyway, but it was to the point where he wanted to drop me off at my reunion meetings instead of me driving, because at one point he had a friend that actually lived down from one of my friends who was hosting the meeting at that time. He had a best friend that lived 2 houses down, and by that time he was just driving down the street and he saw me outside talking to some of my the football players and basketball players that I graduated with. So there was like an instant jealousy, because he thought, just because you're gay that you can't have these straight friends.
Right.
So that became an issue. So it was more of him dropping me off to the meetings and having to come and pick me up from the meetings. And
well, let me ask you this: on why you said that he had to do this, but what in your mind allowed him to say, okay, well, I'm gonna let him take me and drop me off to this meeting, or not just saying no, I'm going to drive to the meeting. Like, what is in your mind, and how do you justify to yourself that you allowed him to say no, I'm gonna drop you off and I'm gonna pick you up?
I guess it was more for him to feel secure that
Okay.
I wasn't. It was more like, okay, well, I can prove you can drop me
Right,
off.
I ain't doing shit,
Right,
so you want to drop me off, drop me off.
Exactly.
Okay, I got you.
That's understandable.
Yeah, and especially when you're in a relationship, if and there's nothing wrong with going the extra mile to make your partner feel a bit more secure. Sometimes that's a problem for them, so I don't see anything.
Exactly. And that's what I felt like I was doing at that time. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, that's fine. You can drop me off. And
So when did it escalate? Because from what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing correctly, it started off with being controlling. And as he was, in my mind, as I see it, losing the power, losing the control, he was grasping for control even more. And so
finding any way to do that.
Right. And so when did it become physical?
it became physical. One day we were actually in the car, and I actually went out of town with one of my clients, and I got back in town, and we were actually getting ready to go to his it was one of his nieces or nephews. They were having like a skating party, and we were in the house, and I was getting dressed, and the doorbell rang. So the doorbell rang, and it was this guy. He came over, and I think it was kind of like an older gentleman, and he was so surprised to see me there. So
and this is at your apartment?
Yes, this is at my apartment. And so
he was surprised to see you at your own apartment.
Yes, and I'm like, during that time, I felt funny because when I introduced myself, he kind of looked at me strangely, like if something had happened, and I didn't know what it was, but I just kind of felt something wasn't right. So he stayed there for a little while. They chatted. The guy didn't stay too long, and then he wound up leaving. And then after he left, he started to call my boyfriend at that time, my partner at that time, his phone constantly. So seeing the name and just seeing how, just seeing the phone going off as, it was, I questioned that. And I said, something's not right. I mean, when this guy came in, he spoke, but he wasn't real nice. He seemed surprised to see me here. And
so just so I'm clear,
right?
You in your boyfriend's house, apartment, a stranger to you comes to the door,
right,
and asks for your boyfriend. Seems surprised to see you,
right?
And you're like, okay, I'm Sidney,
right?
Come on in.
Exactly.
Hey, boyfriend, your friend so and so is here,
right?
And then he leaves quickly, and then comes back, and he's on the phone calling him constantly,
and he's not answering the phone.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
very suspicious.
Right.
Okay.
So on the way to the skating ring, I questioned him about it, and because your senses are there,
Yeah, that's just a strange situation.
So I guess because I asked him that question, he got upset, and it was to the point where we were kind of like going back and forth. I was keeping calm about it because I didn't want to just say something happened while I was gone.
Right.
But it was just so strange that.
Yeah, and let me ask you this question, not to just interrupt, but I'm just, at this point, are you feeling some sort of fear towards him, or is there anything that you don't want him to go off? Like, are you feeling those feelings already? Like, I don't want to make him mad.
Exactly.
But he hadn't even hit you at this point yet.
Right.
Okay. So.
And it was just the point of just like, well, I kind of brought up like, well, the guy was a little strange, just talking just in regular conversation, because like you said, I was a little fearful of really going there because I didn't want to cause an argument, or I didn't want to.
But you had no idea that he would actually you didn't think he had the potential to hit you at this point?
No.
You didn't hear that shit?
Argue.
Right, okay.
Because it was starting leading up to that point where we were kind of like arguing,
right,
or whatever. So anyway, we were on the way going to the event, and when I asked him that, he was like, I don't want to talk about this, I don't know what where your mind is going. Why would you think that? Getting stupid, that doesn't make any sense, all that.
Right.
Shut the conversation out. And I'm like, well, you don't, and I was just basically talking about the situation, saying, you don't think that's strange? And he was like, well, if you continue to talk about this, he said, I'm going to drive your car into the ditch. And so I just instantly, I'm like, okay. I'm like, you're not going to do that. At this point.
This is what you're saying in your
right.
mind.
But I actually told him, I said, well, don't do that. I said, I'm not going to do that. But I'm trying to be calm. I'm trying to figure out this situation because it really had my mind. My mind just would not let it rest.
As it should have.
Right, and that's the intuition speaking to you.
Yeah.
Right.
I think this is, not to interrupt, I think this might be a good breaking point right here. We'll pick back up the story.
Okay.
Let's just refresh the tape.
Okay.
So, we'll be back. I know, we need to tell welcome back. We had left off where you were actually in the car, and this is before the first actual incident. So you were in the car. He had threatened to drive the car in the ditch, and at this time you like trying to calm him down.
I'm thinking, okay, like he's really in my mind. I'm thinking, okay, well he's playing. You know, he's not gonna do that. So at that point in time, I asked him again. I'm like, well, can you just explain why the guy just showed up? Because he didn't know that he was coming over either. And he said, I don't know why he came over. So and I'm like, well, what's the constant blowing up the phone? You know, you don't want to answer the phone with me here. So it was just, he got upset with that. So when we got out of the, once we made it to the place, he came over to me and told me, I don't want to discuss this anymore. We're going in here to have a good time. And that's the end of it. So I'm like, okay, but it still bothered me. So, I wanted to respect his family, and I didn't want to go and cause anything. So I just said, okay, well, I'll just maybe ask later on. So anyway, after we left there, we got back to the house or whatever, and then I asked him about it, and he basically again told me he didn't want to discuss it, and that was it. But it just would not let me rest. I didn't know what was going on.
I mean, I would too.
Right.
So again,
And at this point, you've been together over a year.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, it was over a year. It's maybe about a year and a half. We were in probably in the apartment for maybe like 6 months at this point.
Okay.
So, but anyway, he came over to me, and he kind of like pushed me and said, "Look, I don't want to talk about this anymore." So at that point, I'm like, okay, I don't want to argue. I just kind of swallowed the pill and just went on.
But he pushed you.
Yes.
And it was the first time he had done that.
Right.
Okay.
So what was going through your mind when he pushed you?
In my mind, I was saying, I know this fucker's cheating, basically. It's in my mind.
Not even thinking about the
But
fact that he just pushed you.
Right. I wasn't even thinking, okay, well, he just shoved me.
It's just, oh yeah, see, I know he's guilty.
Right.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. And my thing, and I don't know why, I'm just like, I have to, I was, at that point, I was just like, okay, I have to find out what's going on. So went through the scenario, whatever, and come to find out basically that I guess the guy did like him. He said nothing ever happened. He did invite him over because it was someone he had, I guess, had taught in school or whatever. Had taught him in school. That's how old the guy was.
Oh, okay.
And but nothing had ever happened. So I asked him why we just couldn't have this conversation, and you basically explained to me. So later the guy, he apologized to me, whatever, and it was in the story. But like, okay.
Your boyfriend apologized to you.
Well, the guy did too. He called
Oh,
and apologized. So I'm like, okay. So that was the first episode, and then it got to the point where there was one situation where he had a female friend he actually went to school with. She had just purchased a car and she wanted to get some insurance with him, basically. No, she was trying to get insurance, but she was having trouble getting insurance. I think that's what the problem was. But anyway, he had offered her, and he had spoken to me, saying that he should add her on his insurance. And so I was like, well, I don't think you should do that. One reason why, because he had, I think it's a
SR22.
SR22.
Okay, I've had to have one of those.
He's familiar. And that's when you have high insurance, and because you have some sort of incidents against you on your insurance.
Right. Your license or something like that, you have to.
And and him explaining that he had to make sure that he kept the insurance on there or whatever. And so I just told him I don't think it was a good idea for that. I told him financially, if you want to help her, then fine. But just putting her on your insurance, I don't think that was a good idea. Well, he asked me for my opinion, but because I didn't give him the answer, what he wanted, that was an issue. So basically what happened was, later on, he added her on anyway. And her boy, I think she got pulled over the first couple weeks that she had the car. And her boyfriend actually reached into the glove compartment because he saw his name on it. He demanded her basically to get the insurance. He didn't want her to have another guy's name on her insurance. So she wound up not paying that first month.
Oh.
So then he came back to me and he was like, well, I don't have the money to pay this. Would you help me pay this bill? And because it was, it was kind of like an argument of discussing it, and I just kind of like shut it out or whatever. I felt like, no, this is something that you decide on your own, and you need to really deal with this situation, because I didn't agree from the beginning.
Right.
And that's basically what happened. So because he had that response, it was physical altercation that happened during that time, and just because I told him no, so I got a push in my back into my bedroom.
Okay.
And so during that time, he pushed me or whatever, and I'm like, okay, why are you pushing me? I'm like, it's not that serious. My thing was that he needed to really go and talk to her so he can get the money.
Right.
And he just was not trying to hear that. So it just, started from there. And he came back and he was like, well, you need to give me this money to pay this bill, because I need to keep my insurance on the car. And I just told him, I said, look, I'm not going to do that, because this is something that you agreed to handle yourself, and I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And during that time, I had other things that, that were more important than that on my end. So I didn't. I just started to kind of, get my stuff, get back on my feet. So I didn't have it like that.
Right.
And so that was just the point of that, was that altercation. But it was more, he just kind of pushed me and kind of threatened me a little bit.
Okay.
So it's like,
And at this point, he had already pushed you twice.
right.
You guys have never talked about it at
Right.
this point.
And
He never apologized for it. I don't know what happened, why I pushed you, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So when was the next time that he actually got into hitting you?
The next time was, it was actually my birthday, and we went out to eat, and then my friends wanted to go and hang out. And at this time, because he had basically, in a sense, kind of isolated me from my family and from my friends. I was mostly at home. I was doing stuff only with his family. I was always around him. And my friends were like, well, let's go and hang out.
Yeah, and I want to say that this is important for, I think, our viewers to take note of the patterns and stuff that's leading up to him actually being physically abusive. Like, not wanting to be around your friends and your family and dropping you off to work and all this stuff. The control. So that's really the signs of where it was starting, that he just had to have this control on you. But I'm sorry.
Right, no, you're fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, we went out, and I met some of my friends. We went and had some drinks, and we wound up going to, I think it was like a club or something afterwards, and then we went to get something to eat. At that time, I kind of like texted him and told him that I was hanging out with my friends. We were going here if he wanted to come and meet us, and then my phone had died. So I wound up getting home. It was maybe around 3 o'clock in the morning, or whatever, because we had went to like IHOP or something.
Right.
And when I got home, it was he was like, "Don't you think?" I'm just like, "Okay." He didn't say, "Well, did you have a good time?" Or anything. And the first thing he said, "Well, don't you think you're getting home too late?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm sorry. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I said we went to eat, and I actually had texted you. I said my phone had died." So I apologized for it, and or whatever. And then I laid down and I went to bed. And it was like the next night he wanted to bring it up again. And at this point it was like, okay, well, he was the type of person who was tit for tat in a sense. So the next night he went and hung out with some friends, and he didn't come home till 5 o'clock in the morning.
He beat you. He won.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. I didn't get a text message. I didn't get a call or anything or whatever. And so he came home, and I just like, well, where were you guys? And it was like, we were at IHOP, so it was just like a comment.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. I said till 5. I'm like, because back where in the area where I lived at the time, all the clubs, they closed at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay.
I want to eat. You should be
Right.
home right around 3 like you did.
Exactly. So I'm like, okay. So it just escalated into, like an argument he didn't want me to ask. And so I'm like, okay, well, why is it that I can't ask you, but you can ask me? And he was just like, well, because I don't feel like talking about it. And so I'm like, well, I don't understand. I'm like, you can't tell me where you were till 5 o'clock in the morning. And basically just went from there. We kind of started arguing or whatever. And so I just told him, I said, you know what, I'm going to go to bed. I'm tired of arguing with you. And then I turned around and then I got hit in the back of my head.
With his fist?
Yes.
Wow.
At this point, I was just so in a shock because he had never gotten that physical with me. And he was like, well, I told you not to ask me where.
Don't ask me shit.
Right.
Motherfucker, all that.
And so I'm like,
colorful words.
And I'm like, it threw me off. Just totally threw me off. And so I'm like, okay. For a while, I just remember sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I don't get it. Or you're that upset because, and I was thinking, okay, well, I said, well, maybe he's trying to get me back. I blaming everything on myself at this point. And I'm like, well, maybe I stayed out too late with my friends, and, he's trying to get me back, and he's showing that he, trying to punish me, basically, or whatever.
By punching you?
But, basically staying out till the 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever.
Right, but the punching you felt that was justified because of your actions?
Well, in a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. I felt like, okay, I knew I didn't deserve to get hit because, it really wasn't that serious, and I thought it was just like really petty.
Do you think you ever deserved to get hit?
No, I don't think I deserve to get hit.
Because I think that's an interesting statement for you to say. I don't think I deserve to get hit because it wasn't that serious. Right. But is something ever that serious for you to feel that you deserve to get hit?
No one actually deserves to get hit. I just would say that. But at that point in time, I guess seeing a person change so drastically, I just had so many questions in my head, and I'm like, okay, I knew my mom kind of went through this, but I'm like, okay, is it really this serious for you to get that upset, for you to just really hit somebody?
So you say your mom went through this. Did you witness your
Yeah,
mom going through abuse?
I did. I witnessed my mom going through this as well.
So it's almost a little, I won't say it's normal,
the
but
pathology.
It's familiar to you, so it's not that.
Right.
It's like, I didn't do nothing for you to hit me like that.
Right, exactly. So I'm like, okay, and at this point in time, I started like questioning, like, okay, well, it was just to the point we were just arguing all the time, and I guess I was just so exhausted and basically trying to prove myself and trying to keep arguments down. So at that point in time, I was like, okay, let me learn to just keep, because I was the type of person, I was very outgoing, I was, bubbly, cheerful person, always talking, and I just started to kind of like shut down. And I started keeping my comments to myself. If he asked me my opinion, I started to just like not give my opinion.
Just kind of whatever he wanted to hear.
It was like whatever he wanted to hear because I was so tired of the argument. It was like every night it was an argument. It was like, okay, well, why you do this certain way? And even before I was driving home, I had moved into another office building, and he was like, well, you shouldn't go this way to work. It's going to take you longer in the traffic. And I'm like, let me go where I'm familiar with,
right.
And it was like, just certain things like that. It was just always an argument.
And how long had you guys been together at this point?
At this point, it was going on maybe like I'll say maybe like 2.5 years.
So 2.5 years, he pushed you 2 times, and then he punched you in the head while you were laying in bed.
Right.
After he punched you, he's yelling at the same time.
Yes.
And so, but you're not saying anything. You're just like, hey, what's wrong with you, basically?
Right.
But y'all never talked about the next day. He's never apologized at this point, or recognized, or even talked about him hitting you.
No.
Never said, I'm sorry, I lost control, never want to do it again. Okay.
So I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
So in doing a little research prior to this conversation, I was reading that in same-sex relationships, 1/3 experience some form of domestic violence, but people stay in the relationship and fail to report it because of fear of being outed or fear of, seems like what happened to you, of being taken away from the people that they love, or the person who's doing the hitting has this control and this dominance and kind of dangles that over their head. Would you say, why did you stay? Like, if we're 2.5 years in, what control did he have over you, if any, that made you stay?
I think it was more like I said from the beginning when I first met him. I wasn't in love with him at first. It was more like, okay, this is somebody different. I'll go out or whatever, because I was kind of going through some things. So eventually I did fall in love with him. But I fell in love with the person who I met in the beginning. It was just later their true colors came out, and I was just reflecting. I kept thinking about, okay, it will get better because he was like this in the beginning.
Right.
So I kept looking back to where it was, and I don't know. It was just I'm sorry for that. What you was asking?
Well, but with that being said, I think it's a good time. Let's take a break right quick.
Okay.
Gather our thoughts and get your questions. So we'll be right back.
Sorry.